News.PH, but it's not politics as usual. I'm Pia Hontiveros. Tonight we talk about Yolanda. Is it a humanitarian crisis? We have with us Asian Development Bank Director, is it Director General?
Yeah.
Vinod
Yes.
Thomas. And from the World Food Program Asia, Public Information Officer Silke Burr.
That's correct.
Good evening.
Good
Thank
evening.
you very much for being here. Well, let's begin with this. Mr. Thomas, let's begin with you. The Philippines ranks third in the United Nations world's riskiest countries. Who's number one and number two first?
The number one and number two are small islands in the Pacific, Vanuatu and Tonga. Philippines is among the bigger countries by far, the most vulnerable right now. And there are at least 2 or 3 reasons for that. One,
Yes.
Philippines is really in the harm's way. So the exposure of the people to a disaster is extremely high.
Yeah.
It's also vulnerable. Many of the areas that are affected are also poor. If you look at the poverty rates in the central Luzon, the Luzon area compared to Visayas, the areas that have been hit by Yolanda have very high poverty rates.
Yes.
And then the disaster itself, the pure hazard, they have changed course, they have changed intensity, and Philippines is being hit by much bigger storms
And that's
than we
because
are
of
used
climate
to.
change.
Climate change is clearly a factor, no question about it.
Okay, but it is, we should consider earthquakes or in this case super typhoons as natural hazards, right? That only become disasters if we don't prepare for them. Is that
Correct. Any hazard could become a disaster if a large number of people are affected and they are not able to cope. But that said, there is a difference between earthquakes and floods and storms. If you look at the last 40, 50 years, you will see that while we've had severe earthquakes, memorable ones, volcanoes here, but they have been steady over the years in terms of how the incidence has been. But what leaps off the page are floods and storms in the last
Yes.
40 years.
They're getting
In
more
Asia and
frequent.
Pacific, including the Philippines, these have quadrupled. In the case of the Philippines, it's a bit interesting. It's not that the numbers of disasters, floods and storms, the sheer numbers have gone up, but it is more that the ones that we have are just worse, more severe. And the one we've just had leaps off the page in all respects as extraordinary.
How long have we been on that list as number 3?
This particular ranking would have been, I think, last year, and they changed, but not by a huge margin. So Philippines is a perennial front runner in this particular kind of
Did
ranking.
we ever rank lower than 3rd?
Possibly. And what I might add is that Manila is the second most vulnerable among the cities.
Well,
in this
that's
case,
nice to hear.
in this case,
What's
after Dhaka. So
Dhaka.
Dhaka would be one. So in case of preparedness, all bets are off unless they are raised much higher.
Manila is
commensurate.
2nd most vulnerable in terms of floods.
Well,
typhoons.
the risk of a city to natural disasters, and that includes earthquakes as well. But earthquakes have been more steady over the years compared to floods and storms.
Okay, so going back to the storms, we're talking about Yolanda. Is it an exaggeration to say that this is what we have in the Central Philippines and the Visayas is a humanitarian crisis in the making? Silke of the World Food Program.
Well, there's no question that the humanitarian situation is very serious. We've heard the reports, we've seen the pictures. The needs are intense for the most basic things. People need food, people need water, people need assistance. So the humanitarian needs are very clear.
Mr. Thomas?
Absolutely. I think the 3 factors that have made this into both a humanitarian and a development crisis is one, the region is poor, it's also populated, and it is right in the eye of the storm. The first place hit is the Eastern Visayas. And to put the 3 together, you have the recipe for, in the bad sense of the word, a perfect storm. And so the numbers already tell us that compared to some of the other cyclones or tornadoes elsewhere, this has caused greater damage. This has caused greater deaths already, even by more conservative estimates. So when you put that together, clearly this is a humanitarian crisis. But I would hasten to add that it is also a development crisis, because even in the midst of an emergency where the top priority is to get relief to people, it is also important to do the relief in a way that we think of the next storm that will hit, because this has become a pattern. So it's important to follow the protocols to make sure that what we do today is a basis for building differently for the future. Even emergency rooms in hospitals, even in the midst of a major crisis, has to follow protocols. So yes, a humanitarian crisis, but it means that crisis also needs to be addressed with protocols in mind, so that we are prepared for a next one that might hit. And all indications are, in this part of the world and worldwide, these floods and storms are just going to be increasing in their incidence.
Silke, would the World Food Program and, well, practically all the other international aid agencies are here, if I'm not mistaken. Would you be here if this were not so huge? Would you not be here?
Well, the World Food Programme has been in the Philippines, had a presence here even before this storm hit. We have an operation in Mindanao that provides food to about 1.2 million people. Plus, of course, we were already providing emergency assistance to the victims of the Bohol earthquake and the people displaced in Zamboanga. So there was a need. But actually, you made a very interesting point about the existing vulnerabilities in the environment. So even before the storm hit, when we were planning, when we saw the weather patterns, when we were planning the response, we looked at the potential trajectory of the storm, we looked at who was living where, and based on the poverty or the existing living conditions, we knew before it even hit that quite possibly, in our case, 2.5 million people would need food assistance. And that's still the basis that we're working on now as the needs become clearer.
You think it's just 2.5 million?
That was our initial preliminary assessment. So based on existing vulnerabilities and based on the rapid assessment that we were able to do, the UN teams were on the ground together with the government to do the initial assessment about 12 hours after the storm hit. So early Saturday morning, based on what we saw, there was what's called a rapid assessment. And as the communications come back, as the information comes through, we'll get a clearer picture whether that number is going to go up.
Oh, so you can't tell right now if you did make that correct?
At the moment, we're working on the basis of 2.5, which is the sort of most intelligent analysis that we can use in order to plan our operations. Because as you quite correctly said, there is the initial rapid assessment and the response that we need to do. But then as we get more data, as we do more thorough assessments, that's when we can decide exactly what needs to be done to build back better. In order to prevent these things becoming cyclical. Okay,
let's talk very quickly first about, before we move on to figures. So you talk about 2.5 million. There's been a lot of talk about casualty count. President Aquino was saying that it could be near 2,000 or less than 2,500. And then there were like these rough estimates, talking about 10,000. Mr. Thomas, can you give us an estimate what you think could be the casualty count?
Well, it has gone both ways. In many cases, early estimates have been underestimates, especially in the case of earthquakes around the world. And it has gone the other way. A first reaction based on a particular location you cannot generalize, because the first place hit might have been the most vulnerable and also most thickly populated. In this case, vulnerable, maybe not the most thickly populated. So I think we have to just be cautious and careful in where we want to end with the numbers. But regardless of the precise number, I think this one, 2,500 or more, is a large number to me. It's a large number when you think that 160 people died, in Hurricane Sandy, which cost the United States $68 billion, right? So it's a fine, large number. And comparisons, of course, within the Philippines also put this at the high end, if you compare with Ondoy and other incidents that we've had, Sandong and Pablo and so on. So by all measures, this is off the chart in terms of the intensity of the typhoon and the hardship. And in a particular city like Tacloban, I can't imagine a more
Yeah.
difficult scenario.
Yeah, and we're not even talking about the other areas. No, we're just talking
Correct.
about Tacloban, but there's so many other
Very
provinces
important
affected.
point, Pia, because there are some areas where you can't get to easily from Tacloban or from somewhere else. What it took 2 hours in the past to go from one place to the other is taking 20 hours. And so given limited time and resources, people
Yeah.
do what they can. And
Okay.
I am afraid who is left out of this may be a big story.
Let's talk about the immediate priorities, although it's already been mentioned. So you have food, water, shelter, establishing coordination structure and communications infrastructure. Let's begin with food. No? I guess we cannot overemphasize the need for food. People right now in Tacloban, in other
Yes.
areas, are saying that they're going hungry.
Yeah.
How important, just so that we can drive home the point even more, so that people will understand why relief supplies need to get to where they need to go. How important is food and water?
Well, food is essential, obviously, not just for survival, but also for the long-term impact of a situation like that. I mean, there's a couple of factors to consider. One is the immediate life-saving assistance that is necessary just to keep going, the calories and the nutrients that you need in order to keep going. The other thing is thinking about the nutritionally vulnerable populations, especially women and young children, exactly, who, when experiencing a shock like this, if they were in a situation where they were perhaps already slightly malnourished, chronically malnourished, some lighter form of undernutrition, a shock like this can set that into a serious problem, acute malnutrition, and that's something that we want to prevent. So at the moment, the World Food Programme has been flying in high-energy biscuits, and I've brought you an example so you can see what they're like. This is a kind of fortified biscuit that has added vitamins and minerals. They're pretty light, so they're good to transport in emergencies, and they have the nutrients and the calories, the energy to keep people going in the first days after
This is
an
like one
emergency.
meal, good for one meal, or that's good for one
This
day, or
is,
what?
you need a couple of packs of these to get you through the day, just in terms of calorie count, but it's enough in the beginning to keep you going.
Yeah, when you say in the beginning, you mean like what, the first 24, 48, 72 hours?
Well, the first days of the emergency, these will be flying in at least for the next few weeks, but our plans are eventually to build up the food ration, and of course we're working in partnership with the Department for Social Welfare and Development here, so they are putting together these family packs. We've been contributing rice to that in the Tacloban area. So rice has gone into about 9,000 of those family packs today.
Okay, those family packs, have they already reached victims in Tacloban or other areas?
Yes, there's been distributions going on. Today, about 9,000 of these family packs were distributed according to our latest reports.
Yeah, distributed where?
In Tacloban and the surrounding areas.
I mean, actual distribution to the victims, to the survivors. They're not just stored somewhere. They're not just like, so many reports about relief supplies, some of them stuck in the airport in Tacloban.
No, these are not in the airport in Tacloban. These are the packs that are being distributed. I mean, the logistics chain, as you say, has been challenging, but the flow is moving, I would say.
Okay. In this country, the basic staple is rice. People are used to rice. If you don't eat rice, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's like you hadn't had a complete meal. So is it challenging to give that to survivors of Yolanda?
Yes, it's not an ideal solution as a meal, quite obviously, but bear in mind also that at the moment people don't have cooking facilities, and in order to prepare rice you need a heat source, you need water, and those are very scarce in supply at the moment, those things.
Right.
So rice can be or will be a very important commodity for the distributions. But at the moment, this is a quick and easy, ready-to-eat solution.
Yeah, ready to eat. That's why what they usually distribute is ready to eat.
Exactly. I mean, of course, the World Food Programme is not the only organisation bringing in food supplies. There's many other players in the humanitarian community and through the government. So there's different kinds of commodities, including these ready-to-eat meals.
40 tons, you brought in 40 tons.
There were 40 tons of these biscuits that were flown in. They landed yesterday and started moving to Tacloban today.
Landed in Manila.
Landed in Manila.
Yesterday.
Yeah, they came from our supplier in Dubai. In this case, we have a big warehouse there, a humanitarian response depot. So what's been coming from there has been food, but also infrastructural material that helps the humanitarian aid community be up and running and working. Things like telecommunications equipment, prefabricated offices, mobile storage units, all these things that the aid workers need in order to get up and running.
Yeah, that's needed, very important, because of course in a disaster like this, you don't have buildings standing anymore. But we'll get back to that in a little while. We'll check in first with the governor of one of the provinces on the island of Panay, which was severely affected. We have Antigua Governor Ezequiel Javier. Governor X, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yes, Governor,
Hello.
this is Pia Hontiveros. Governor, on Monday evening, I was speaking to the head of your Provincial Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, and he was saying that one of your immediate needs is temporary shelter. Is that
Yes,
correct?
temporary shelter. We need those because we have to receive otherwise we'll be spending food every day. We'll be spending more. But, so that's what I wanted to ask the provincial government. The national government, I mean, because we have about 14,000 homes were totally damaged. No? And
how many
about
people, Governor,
70,000 of homes were totally damaged.
How many people, Governor, have no homes?
14,301.
14,000 people have no homes.
Yes, 14,000.
Okay. Well, do you already have that temporary shelter, whether they are tents or whatever?
We don't have, eight
Right, I think
yes, you will download what we do for each municipality for the temporary shelters. We are waiting also for financial support.
I think we're going to try and get a better line to Governor X Javier of Antique. I was about to say ganyan talaga, no? That is one of the disasters here when communications. Okay, let's go back to this. So food, water, shelter. You were talking about coordination structure, communications infrastructure. That was one of the biggest, or still is one of the biggest problems when all comms were down and nobody could call anybody. So we have international aid agencies coming in and helping set up communications infrastructure.
It's really the humanitarian community is organized in such a way that different agencies take the lead in different kinds of responses. So the World Food Programme is the leader, amongst other things, of the emergency telecommunications cluster, which means that essentially we try to come in and help set up those communication services for the humanitarian aid workers. So it means things like generators, it means bringing in radios, digital radios for communications, setting up data connectivity, those kinds of things, satellite communications. And it's, as you say, really important because the information and the coordination is key.
But do you have that already?
There's equipment coming in.
Equipment coming in, so you don't have it yet?
No, we have, there were flights from the Humanitarian Response Depot in Subang in Malaysia, which is where we store that kind of equipment, that arrived on Monday and Tuesday. They contained generators, they contained digital handheld radios. So these things are coming in. The generator, I believe, arrived in Tacloban today. So that will be a great help. I mean, even just for people trying to charge their satellite phones, for example, trying to communicate, that will be a great help to begin with.
Yeah, okay. But that is another challenge, right? So you have all this equipment being flown into Manila, but then the problem is transporting it from Manila to Tacloban.
That's an excellent point. Actually, what's happening now is that Cebu has emerged as the sort of logistics hub for the humanitarian relief effort. So at the moment, our flights from the Humanitarian Response Depot in Malaysia are arriving directly in Cebu. And the main thing is we're diversifying the logistics corridors for the response, not trying to rely only on the military aircraft that have been going into Tacloban, which is...
But they're practically the only ones that are allowed to fly into Tacloban.
That's correct, that's correct. At the moment we're looking at other options. So for example, I mean the Philippines is more than 7,000 islands, so waterways, what can we do? Are there usable ports? What can we use to transport other things? Also finding stocks of food in country that we can transport perhaps by road closer to the affected areas and distribute that way. So at the moment we're looking at different logistics approaches as well.
Okay, we're going to have to try and go back to Governor Xavier from Antique. Governor Javier?
Good evening. Yeah.
Yeah, good evening again, sir. Okay, so you were saying that you still don't have those temporary shelters? Did I understand it correctly?
No, we are concentrating first on operations packs for police. Before that, we are planning to for each municipality, 8 municipalities, for temporary shelters, so that get the evacuees out of the evacuation centers. To minimize our expenses. It's very hard for us to feed the evacuees 3 times a day.
Governor Javier, okay, I'll just ask you one last question, then I'll let you go because we really have a problem understanding what you're saying. But the relief supplies, the aid, you're not getting enough. Is that correct?
I think we have enough supplies for the operations, no? Especially for the evacuees. And I think in 2 weeks' time, we finish our relief operations and then we concentrate now on the particulars.
All right. I think I need to let Governor Xavier go. Anyway, thank you very much, Governor Xavier of Antique. That is on the island of Panay, one of the hardest hit. But do you have people in Panay, on Panay Island, in the provinces of Antique, Aklan, Capiz, or Iloilo?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, no. I guess the answer is no, because there are some people who say who let us know through social media that aid has not yet reached them, and that's one of the that's one of the islands that was also hardest hit. Is that another challenge for international aid agencies when you can't reach everybody that needs to be reached?
Of course, it's an enormous challenge, and there's really, the complications are twofold at the moment. I mean, one is the information, finding out where people are who need assistance, and the second challenge is getting there. So it's a twofold challenge at the moment. But as the logistics approach solidifies, I think it'll be much, much easier to get to those people, and that's happening, that's getting better day by day.
It's day 6. Mr. Thomas, you want to say something about food and...
I think the additional point I would say is that I think the relief effort is paramount. While we do that, there is a construction and reconstruction to come, and then all along the way, building in the prevention for the next one is also critically important. So that includes what we learned from this as well, evacuation centers that are dedicated and play multi-roles like a community center, but also as one that can be used.
But but in Tacloban and in other areas in Leyte, the evacuation centers themselves were damaged, if not completely collapsed.
That is the point. If they are built to be responsive to a major event, and there are experiences of how that can be done, that would be just as important going forward. And thoughts and plans of evacuation, of course, that has been done as well, to save probably 1 million lives. But nevertheless, that can be stepped up, especially if these events are going to be harder and harder going forward. And then early warning systems, they pay off even in the difficult situations like Bangladesh. They were hugely successful. But here in the south of the Philippines, in Mindanao, we were hit by a storm, a typhoon in 2011. And in one city, Cagayan that was not used to anything like this, more than 600 people killed. A year later, you were used to it. Again, you are talking about a once-in-a-100-year event, but it happens twice in 2 years. There were no casualties, at least in that town. So early warning, evacuation centers, all of these need to be built in. I know it's a lot, but we are talking about saving lives. Just as important as relief, reconstruction is the building up of prevention for this regular return of these
But I'm sure, I'm sure, sir, you've studied this also. There are two things about Filipinos. One is that no, it's not going to happen to us. No, that the prediction is just a prediction. It's not going to happen. It's not going to turn into reality. And the other is that Filipinos don't want to leave their homes behind.
I think in this case, there's a particular problem. I mean, this has been tried elsewhere as well. For example, in Sri Lanka, you have the tsunami. Can we relocate the people? Now, if people's livelihoods is linked to the seas, the oceans, where do you go, right? So livelihood is critical. So in this case, by the way, rebuilding the livelihood is also just as important, right, as we do. So people don't want to leave, maybe sentimental attachment, but also their livelihoods are attached to where they are. So we can say it's easier said than done. In any case, some diversification of livelihoods is a good thing to do, regardless. But it's particularly critical when it is linked to these disasters that are happening again and again. And I think this point that this won't happen to us, or it will, that picture is changing. It's a black swan. You don't expect one in the midst of the white swan, but it's now showing up and showing up with greater regularity.
But there's another thing about Philippines. Well, it already happened, so it's not going to happen again. So, because you were saying that it's going to get worse, but even if you tell people that, they're not going to believe it.
Right. This is why it's important to look at the so-called once 100 year happening twice in 2 years. And not just in the Philippines, it's all over the world. So in this case, yes, preparedness could have been greater, but it's like my going and taking my intermediate Tagalog test, and I'm prepared. But suddenly by mistake, I'm given the advanced test or the graduate level test, and I don't do well. It's not because I wasn't prepared, but I'm facing a reality that I had not expected.
But Pag-asa and all the other international weather all the other weather agencies all around the world were warning us about the same thing. There was no lack of warning.
That's right. The warning, I was, during Hurricane Sandy, I was in the United States, and during Yolanda, I'm here. For the week before, the degree of warning by the public sector, private sector, very similar. Because the technology, etc., may be different, but the same degree of warning was given. But the ability to withstand something that was way beyond anyone's comprehension.
Okay, it's day 6 since Yolanda struck. What should have happened by day 6, ideally, Silke?
Well, there's various steps. The immediate assessment of the situation, trying to find out what's going on and where assistance is needed.
Immediate assessment meaning it should have happened on day 1, day 2?
It's usually a rapid needs assessment that takes place in the first 72 hours. So we're looking at 3 days. That has been happening, and there's been a coordinated assessment mission between the humanitarian community, the UN agencies, and the government. So that's been going on. The logistics system that sort of sprung into action as quickly as the challenges that they faced would allow it to. So that's moving. Now it's a matter of keeping the flow going. And what's also very, very important is perhaps the TV cameras will move out in a week or two, but we must not lose sight of the needs that are there And very importantly, we also must not lose sight of the long-term needs, the building back better, the development approach. So taking it from a humanitarian situation with humanitarian needs into an opportunity that we can learn from.
Yeah. Mr. Thomas?
Well, I would say accounting for people's casualties, where they are, etc. That is critical. The lifeline to to healthcare and the basic needs, that is critical in the early stage, and then the coordination of the assistance and support in a sensible way. Having a lot of support is great, but its coordination I can't overstate, because it could really run into each other and be counterproductive if it's not used. And we have some good experiences around the world, but some really terrible experiences as well. We can learn from. These three have to be in place in the first 6 days.
For 6 days?
Yeah, but then...
Okay, so is it in place already here? Is coordination
there are
in place
elements
already?
of that, but I think again... Elements of that, yes, in place, but Tacloban is facing something that very few places in the world has faced. Its location, its isolation in some ways, the degree of the damage, and a typhoon that beat all records human beings have seen.
All right, well, we'll have to say thank you to the two of you, Dr. Thomas and Ms. Burr. Thank you very much for joining us.
Very much.
And thank you for watching. I'm Pia Hontiveros. This is News.PH. See you again next Wednesday. Good night.